Hello, hello. We are back in the whiskey lair. It is currently raining out, which I'm totally okay with because today I'm drinking one of my favorite Scotch whiskeys and the weather just reminds me more of Scotland. The whiskey we have today is the Rosebank 21 year. Many of you may not have even heard of Rosebank, which makes sense because Rosebank was closed in 1993. Some of my absolute favorite whiskeys are from closed distilleries. Discovering closed distilleries was one of the most exciting experiences of my whiskey life. It comes as no surprise that many of the best whiskeys, and in fact most of the best whiskey ever made, was distilled in the 20th century. But for historical, monetary, cultural reasons, all different types of reasons, many of them were closed. However, there are still little bottles of whiskey history just scattered around the world, just waiting for us to find them and discover them and drink them. Whiskey writers talk all the time about their white whales, these whiskeys that they would sell an arm or a kidney for, whiskeys that may not even exist anymore, that the last drop may have been poured out and drunk up years ago. And you can sort of you can understand the appeal of collecting whiskey, of finding something that is truly special, but also ephemeral. The joy and the melancholy of drinking the last of a bottle that you're just so excited about, and will never be made again, will never be drank up again. It's an incredible experience. And for me, the first whiskey that ever did that was actually Rosebank. I was 23 years old. I was living with my brother, Zach, and I remember I was reading Michael Jackson's guide. I was reading Michael Jackson, the whiskey writer's complete guide to single malt Scotch. And I came across this whiskey, Rosebank, and he was just describing this fiery lowland whiskey that could single-handedly change the reputation of lowland Scotch. Lowland Scotch has a reputation for not being quite as high quality. It's ironic, and it's actually relatively stupid because the location of the distillery has very little to do with the quality. Really what determines the flavors and the quality of the whiskey are the production methods. And perhaps the production methods are less popular, but being in the lowlands doesn't actually make the whiskey any better or worse. When it comes to lowland single malt, there's one main difference from a production standpoint, and that is triple distillation. Triple distillation, of course, is when you distill a whiskey 3 times as opposed to 2. Most single malt Scotch is distilled twice. However, a lot of lowland Scotches are triple distilled, and the theory as to why is rooted, actually, believe it or not, in Irish whiskey. You see, during the 19th century, many Irish people were immigrating into Scotland, into the lowlands, to Glasgow, and a lot of the distilleries were trying to produce whiskey that would cater to them. And in Ireland, whiskey was produced in the pure pot still style. It had to do with actually avoiding taxes. Irish whiskey makers were taxed based on how much malted barley they were using. So what they would do is they would actually blend malted barley with unmalted barley, which when only distilled twice would produce this kind of rougher, harsher palate. So they started distilling a 3rd time to really clean it out, clean it up, make it a little bit more approachable, a little bit easier to drink. As a result, triple distilled whiskey tends to be a little bit lighter, but it also tends to have these floral, fragrant notes that have quite a bit of appeal. The upside of triple distilling is that you get these lighter, floral, fragrant notes that are actually quite lovely. And when you're distilling Scotch, you're actually trying to strike this balance between getting, whiskey that is that's approachable, that's easy to drink, that is, quote unquote smooth, but you're also trying to retain that texture and that flavor. For a lot of people and a lot of whiskey drinkers, triple distillation just loses too much of that texture. What's unique about Rosebank is it still has those fruity, floral, fragrant notes, but at the same time, it still has quite a bit of oomph. particularly at cask strength, which of course begs the question, why? The reason is twofold. First is partial distillation. Rosebank was owned by DCL in the 20th century, and when you dig through their archives, it looks like they were doing some 2.5 distillation. 2.5 distillation is when you distill some of the whiskey twice and some of the whiskey 3 times. It's actually a little bit more complicated than that, but some examples of distilleries today that are still doing this method are Springbank and Mortlake, which of course are legends in and of themselves. The second reason is worm tub condensers. Worm tub condensers are an old school method of condensing the spirit, which creates what's called a copper deprived environment. Copper deprived environment basically just doesn't clean the whiskey as much, and so you end up with a little bit more meat on the bone. Again, both these concepts are a little more complicated than that, but we'll talk about them more in the future. The long and the short of it is, Rosebank is just not your typical lowland whiskey. So let's try the whiskey. It's exciting just to open a fresh bottle. So this is Rosebank 21. It's bottle 4,397 out of 4,530 that were produced for the world. It was distilled in 1992. It was bottled in 2014. It's 55.3% alcohol by volume, and my guess is it was aged primarily in ex-bourbon barrels, though there's no way to really know. Wow. Right off the bat, this is a honey bomb. There's so much like candied apple, raspberries, caramel. I'm actually getting Haagen-Dazs vanilla bean ice cream, like Nilla wafers, and some serious like cinnamon and sugar spices. It's incredible. It's very smooth and clean and easy drinking on the front, very gentle and sweet. But as soon as it hits the mid palate, you start getting this like really warm spice, and it actually coats the roof of your mouth with oil, and then just like just this warm down deep into your soul. It's absolutely delicious. This is what I'm talking about with Rosebank. You get that honey and that sweetness and the florality and the fruitiness, all of that really just delightful top notes, but it has so much depth to it. It's really something else. Let's add just a drop of water. When you're drinking something like this, it's been aged long enough, you can just add 1 drop of water just to open it up a little bit. You really don't need to cut this very much. You just want to add a little water just to see how it opens up. So we added a drop of water. Wow, immediately you start to see some like blood orange citrus. It really opens up. And that like wafer note comes out like the inside of a Twix bar. And when you're just adding a little tiny bit of water, it doesn't necessarily tame it. This actually starts to get chewier. You get a little bit more texture. You're really releasing some of those oils. Wow, that is absolutely scrumptious. So, thank you, Slange. I wish you good health, and I hope you find a whiskey like this that just lights your world on fire, that makes you remember when you had it. Cheers.
What are the craziest whiskeys you've ever had?
Craziest whiskeys I've ever had? I had a 27-year-old Port Ellen right after Whiskey Fest with Ian Chang and Matt Hoffman. It was wild and a just hilarious night. We had it at the St. Andrews pub. I also had a 1969 43-year-old Karizawa in France at the Sauterne restaurant. That was nuts. And then the other crazy ones. I remember the first time I ever had Brora with Mitch. It was crazy. We were listening to Starry Starry Night on vinyl, drinking Brora 30. You want to talk about a pairing? That was out of this world. Other craziest whiskeys. Oh, Jesus. And I had the Joker with Ichiro Okudo at Chichibu Distillery, sitting next to the Joker. It's a painting, so that the label of the Joker, so like one of the craziest Japanese whiskeys ever made, was actually a painting painted by some local in the town of Chichibu, and they put the painting up on the wall. And I remember he walked in, I didn't know he was going to be there, and he just asked me, he was like, "Hey, you ever had this?" And he pulls out the Joker, and I sat there and had the Joker with the guy who made it next to the painting. It was unreal.